Hi everyone, I'm Jed Shlackman. I work as a holistic counselor as well as a hypnotherapist and energy healer. For the current video, I'll be speaking about the topic of our wise self versus our wounded self, looking at the interaction or interplay of those aspects of ourself or our identity and exploring how we can work on our self-healing to live life more from the perspective of the wise self than from the wounded self. To begin, we're going to look at what each of those terms refer to. So first, the wounded self would be the aspects of your identity that are in some way responding or reacting to an experience of being wounded or hurt in some manner. A wound could be a physical wound, so we have physical injuries, and it could also be psychological. So there are ways in which we might feel that we've been abandoned, rejected, betrayed, neglected, ostracized, so on. So different ways that our sense of self has experienced some form of injury or pain or suffering. And the wounded self develops some type of response or reaction to that in order to in some way protect itself or soothe or comfort itself. So there's many different ways in which we might compensate for those wounds. But the basic idea is that from some initial state of balance and harmony, you've shifted into some specific pattern of reaction based upon that wounding, where you're not able to be centered and settled and look at life from a clear perspective. You're now responding to things more from that sense of being wounded and needing to somehow protect yourself or keep yourself safe or comforted. Now we're going to look at the concept of the wise self. The idea of the wise self is often related to a kind of metaphysical or spiritual concept that we have a soul or higher self that sees the big picture of our life or life as a whole, that has a perspective coming from a place of balance and wholeness, where it can see the totality of things, where it can be more centered and able to use a lot more knowledge or understanding to more wisely relate to anything that we're encountering in our life. So it's not restricted or constricted by the wounded self and that self's need to have some form of protection. So the wise self has access to an expanded view, to a wider range of awareness or information from which to respond to life, to negotiate any situations or environments that you might be interacting with or encountering. So that's why it's called the wise self, because it has access to a lot more information, a wider range of experience, and it can make wise decisions or determinations about how to handle things. So ideally we would be able to live life more fully from the point of awareness of the wise self relative to the wounded self, the wounded self has some experience and some understanding from which it's relating to life, but it's limited to a certain range of usefulness. And to help illustrate that, I'll use the analogy of a physical wound where we have a physical injury and our body needs to protect and repair itself having been injured. So let's say you have a cut on your arm. Well, first the body needs to go into this kind of hyperactive mode to produce a temporary tissue covering there so that your inner part of your flesh is not exposed, so that you won't catch an infection there. So you'll create a covering there, you'll develop a scab over that particular cut, and your body is spending some extra energy in that area to maintain that protection as well as to repair the tissue there to help restore that part of your body back to its original normal state. So while your body's doing that, it will not be able to pay as much attention perhaps to other things that are happening in your life or in your environment. It's putting extra focus toward dealing with that particular injury. Also, while you're in that state of protection and recovery, you may need to restrict your physical activity, so you might not be able to do things that you would normally be doing because they would put some stress on that area and they might potentially aggravate the injury. So you're going to adjust and adapt your routine to make sure you don't aggravate that injury, to make sure you have time there to heal and recover and come back toward your full healthy state. Now the challenge would be is to be able to make the shift between that emergency state of protection there and coming back to your normal fully active state where your body doesn't have to focus on repairing the injury. If you were to stay in that injury repair and protection mode indefinitely beyond what is needed, you'd end up restricting your life experience. So you might be missing out on fully living life, doing all the things you'd naturally be able to do and would like to do, missing out on that fulfillment by being stuck in that state of feeling you need to protect your body where it's injured. So there's a time frame in which the wounded self is doing what is healthy or ideal for you, but if you are stuck indefinitely or permanently in the activity of the wounded self, you wouldn't be actually living your life in a more wise, rational way. You'd be disabling or handicapping yourself beyond what is actually useful or valuable. So with different aspects of life, we sometimes let that wounded self take over our life and restrict us from living a more full life if we were to look at things from the perspective of the wise self. So the wise self has access to more potential ways of relating to your life environment, to whatever is happening in your current circumstance. It's not confined or restricted by what the wounded self felt it needed to do at the time you were wounded. Often we're doing things in our life that if we were able to look at them in a more rational and wise manner don't seem to make sense. We might be doing things that we recognize are in some way harming us or impairing our full potential in our life. An example would be engaging in an addictive pattern. So if you're immersed in a drug addiction, a sex addiction, a gambling addiction, a digital media type addiction, all of these different things that we might from our wise self recognize are creating some harm in our life, they served some purpose for our wounded self. They might be things that allowed for some type of distraction or some type of comfort when a person felt emotionally wounded. So it's helpful to understand why the wounded self might have chosen a particular pattern or behavior, a way of bringing itself protection or comfort or some form of escape from emotional pain. Whatever that pattern might be, there was some purpose there, some function to the way in which we began to act or react. If we can develop some skills or resources to reconnect more with our wise self, with a more complete, balanced, and whole view of ourself and our life, then we have the opportunity to break free of any wounded self type patterns that aren't really healthy for us anymore. So your wise self isn't living life from a state of fear or pain or suffering. It's actually able to see things more clearly and fully and make a more wise choice in any moment about what is the most healthy or optimal way to function or to live. You could think of your wise self as a spiritual intelligence that has a perspective beyond what your wounded or insecure personality self might be bringing into the situation. We can do practices like deep breathing or meditation. We can use journaling, self-reflection, different things that help us step out of our reactive responses into more of a paused or calm state where we can think more clearly about whatever's happening. And that's where we can access more of that wise self rather than being in a reactive mode, rather than being stuck in the perspective of the wounded self. So if you reflect on any patterns in your own life, you might notice this distinction where you have the wounded self seeming to take over how you're functioning. You might be acting out of fear or insecurity. You might be trying to present a particular facade to people around you. You might be escaping from pain or suffering through some type of self-soothing or addiction. You might be interacting with people in your environment based upon past social environments that you were a part of, where you adapted to being around certain people and relating to them in certain ways to gain approval or acceptance. So it might have seemed functional in that particular social environment or culture, whereas in your current stage of life and your current environment, acting in the same manner might actually be counterproductive. It might be creating unhealthy relationships. It might be preventing you from asserting yourself more authentically, more genuinely. It might keep you from pursuing things that are more in harmony with your current values and priorities. So there's many ways in which we might adapt to our environment, whether it's our physical environment or our social environment. The wounded self might be trying to avoid being rejected or abandoned or embarrassed, whereas the wise self might see beyond that. It might see that if it's more authentic, if it's not trying to please and appease other people, it's actually exerting more of your power, creating more potentials or possibilities in your life that will reflect what you'd like to really manifest or become. If we're constantly living our life trying to please other people, trying to receive validation and approval from those who are in our current environment, it's often reflecting how we were doing that with our past environment, and it's keeping us from focusing more on what's really meaningful or valuable, what reflects our own values, our own priorities, our own greater vision for our life. So that's where our wise self might be able to bring us more guidance or greater awareness. Our wise self can often see possibilities and potentials that our wounded self can't. It might in some way inspire us to step outside of whatever boxes we've put ourselves in. It might give us greater courage. It might help us feel more empowered to step outside of our own comfort zone. It, in a sense, can give us the energy, the inspiration to be more fully present, to express more of our own energy, more of our own talents and vision, more of our own inner wisdom. So it's often a challenge to break free of the wounded self because we've been in some of those patterns for many years. We've created a certain persona, in a sense, through which we live our life, through which we relate to other people, even influencing what we think are our own values or priorities, but those may merely reflect what we felt we needed to embody to please other people or to conform to a culture or society that we were part of. So there's the potential there to step beyond that, to really fully claim our soul's essence and potential, to not be constricted by the sense that we need to conform to feel safe around other people. There are certainly stages of our life where that may seem ideal or necessary, where based upon those wounds we developed some skills for relating to our social environment that seemed useful, that helped keep us in some way safe, that did allow us to function adequately, to meet some of our basic needs. but at the same time, that could limit us and keep us from moving or evolving further in our life path or trajectory. So the wounded self, in a sense, is a sub-self, or subset, I should say, of the wise self. The wise self actually has access to knowledge of all of our experiences and all the skills and talents we've developed, all the different ways that we've learned to handle different situations in life. So we don't lose the resources or skills that we developed in the wounded self states when we access our wise self. We still have access to that. We just have access to resources that go way beyond what any particular wounded self might have accessed or developed. So it allows us to be a more whole, more complete, more balanced being. And this is the message that I'd like to present, that we can go beyond the limitations of our wounded self, and we can embody more of our wise self as we practice going into more calm states, as we practice meditation, self-reflection, as we question our own behaviors, our own patterns. We can learn not to just take everything for granted, not to just accept that things are how they are and that will continue that way. We can have faith and trust that we can evolve, that we can transform, that we can master more skills, more talents, more capabilities, and we can go beyond who we've been in the past. I hope that this discussion has given you some ideas, some inspiration to work on your own self-realization, in a sense, and self-actualization, to have more resources within yourself, to see yourself and your life from a more balanced and more expanded point of view. For those that are interested in personal growth and holistic wellness, I invite you to visit my website, which is phinsights.com. That's phinsights.com. For now, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.